40 minutes. That one. I know. And now the stage is yours.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about yourself.
I will do, thank you. And I'm going to attempt this. Good Kval? No, good Kval?
Good Kval.
That's fine. Thank you so much for inviting me to address you this evening. I am so thrilled and pleased to be here. I am the co-founder of a company called Futera. And Futera was founded in 2001 with the purpose of imagining better, of trying to think of how the world could be better, and helping big companies and governments and charities get us there. We've had an office here in Stockholm since 2000. Where are the Futerans in the audience? Well, obviously the Futerans are not following the rules, they're sitting on the stairs. It's very much what our company is about. But I'm not going to talk to you about any of the work that we do as a business. I'm going to talk to you about what we think and what I've discovered in 20 years of working in social and environmental sustainability. And I have a very posh English accent, and I also have a cold. So we'll see how those two things come together, and how much like a teenage boy my voice sounds by the end of this speech. So imagine better. I'm going to talk to you a lot about this need for positive thinking. But first I want to start with why. I'm going to show you something called the crisis curve. And the crisis curve looks very similar to what Johan presented earlier with his curves, two curves that went down and one curve that went up. And he and I have come to a very similar graph, but through completely different routes. So Johan's graph was from the science of how do we fit within planetary boundaries and meet the SDGs. My graph comes from the psychology and sociology of change. So psychologists and therapists work with something called a crisis curve, which is what we as individuals go through when we hit a crisis. A crisis in our family, a crisis of health, maybe an addiction, a very serious addictive crisis. And also, this curve comes from sociologists and how they say culture changes. How do we change altogether? There's an extraordinary correlation between how individuals face crisis and how whole societies face crisis. Almost as if collectively we act in the same way that one person would act if they face a problem. And it all starts with changes in normal. Problems brew. We become more aware that we're facing a challenge. We keep doing the same thing, but expecting a different result. Many of us will recognise this from our own lives, and I'm sure we can recognise it from the climate crisis that we're facing. We often hit a crossroads, a meeting of the pathways, a moment of the highest anxiety when we're facing a crisis. For an individual, that might be when a problem has got so bad it can no longer be ignored. It's beginning to affect their life, their family, their work. You could argue that the latest IPCC report is the crossroads moment, the crisis moment for us on climate change, if we're thinking as a society. Now, it's important to note that when we're at a crossroads, we become very open to suggestion. We start breaking out of our common ways of thinking, and we start becoming very change-minded. We become change-minded. And we can take very good and very bad decisions when we face crossroads. When the crisis has built so much, we become very able to choose well and to choose badly. Trump. I don't want to be too political. Bad throat, remember. One of three things happen when we hit a crisis, as individuals and in our whole societies. One is disaster. The problems that got us to the crossroads, we don't deal with them, we deny the problem, we try to survive, we blame ourselves, but we don't actually change anything. Disaster. Business as usual. But the most common thing, and the thing that drives psychologists and therapists crazy, is something called maladaptation. Maladaptation, which is where we do make some changes, they're just not the right changes. If we're facing a personal crisis of addiction, maybe we change our addiction from one problem to another. Or if we're thinking about climate change, a maladaptation would be something like geoengineering, where we try to solve the symptoms, but not the cause of our problem. But disaster still comes. And when you think about climate change and the crisis that we're facing with climate change, these two pathways are the pathways which perhaps we hear most about. Small changes we could make to delay disaster, or Mad Max, the absolute crisis in our society. However, when I look at the historical crises that we've faced, and when I look at the psychology of how individuals face crisis, there is a third path out of the crossroads. And it's a path that goes upwards, where we deal with the problems that caused the crisis in the first place, and we come out of it better than we started. Now, for an individual, this might mean dealing with the reasons for their addiction, dealing with the causes of the problem in their family. For us, in terms of climate change, it's nearly impossible to manage that route, but it is there, where we're forced to move to a renewable-based economy and thereby lift 50% of our fellow human beings who don't have access to energy out of energy poverty and reach a place where everybody in humanity could have access to energy. There are so many co-benefits of taking action on climate change. Benefits for our health, benefits for our economy, benefits for the poorest in our societies, that if we deal with the problems that cause climate change, we could come out of this crisis better than when we went in. Now, you're probably thinking, what makes a difference? If you're standing at crossroads, is it technology? Is it politics? What is it that means that you come out better or worse? And when you look at the literature, when you look at the psychology and the sociology, there's actually only one thing that can be compared across all the different examples. And it's not anything physical, and it's definitely not anything political. It's emotional and psychological. So, in 1928, William Thomas, and actually William and his wife Dorothy Thomas, wrote a book. And there was one sentence in this book, which is, if men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. And this one sentence went on to be the basis of modern sociology, of how we look at how groups of people interact with each other. You might be more familiar with it with the word self-fulfilling prophecy. The one thing that defines what pathway you take out of the crossroads is which pathway you're facing. If you are facing towards the disaster pathway, if that's what you expect to happen, then that is where your action, your investment, your choices, your behaviours will lead you to. if you are facing towards a positive outcome, if that's what you believe will happen, then that's where your behaviours will take you. As human beings, we have this almost a magical ability to subconsciously act towards what we think an outcome is going to be. And when it comes to climate change, which ones of those pathways, of those three outcomes, are we facing? Which one are we spending our time talking about, telling each other stories about, writing newspapers articles about? Are we talking about the path downwards or the path upwards? All of our greatest change makers throughout history have known this power. They've known how important it is to face even unimaginable odds with hope and positivity. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Believe you can and you're halfway there. In fact, my favourite one isn't on here. My favourite one is Nelson Mandela. It always feels impossible until it's done. So, the company Interface, who makes flooring, wanted to find out whether scientists and climate activists and climate experts are looking upwards or downwards. And they asked, do you believe we can take back our climate and make a climate fit for life? And of the 400 scientists and experts they asked around the world, 95% of them said, yes, it's difficult, but possible. That's been my experience as well of dealing with climate scientists around the world. Despite being the people who have access to exactly how fucked everything is, I'm allowed to say that it's cute when British people swear. You're told. Despite knowing this data more intimately than any of us do, they actually generally, as a group, feel that it is possible for us still to come out of this, as Professor Rockström presented to us. However, when I looked at that statistic, that 95% of these scientists and experts think that it is difficult but possible, that wasn't my experience of talking to people every day. And so last year, we surveyed the world population. So we surveyed 21,000 people in 26 countries to ask them whether they think we can solve climate change or reduce climate change. Now, 4% of them worldwide were deniers. They're very loud. They're very overrepresented in comments on newspaper articles. There's one of them in the White House. But they only represent